You're listening to the ESO Network, your station for all things geek.
Hello, world, and welcome to Tales from Hollywoodland, a veritable feast of movies, television, Broadway, showbiz stories, and even a little bit of news and gossip. With Julian Schlossberg, Arthur E. Friedman, Stephen J. Rubin, and I'm your announcer who is enjoying the life of vacation, Mike Faber. Today, we're joined by Peter Hoffman, Hollywood executive extraordinaire. And now, here's Steve.
Wow.
I feel like Johnny Carson.
Yeah. Those of us who are old enough to know Johnny Carson, right?
That's right. He's a little younger than Kit Carson.
Did you know Kit? Because I love Kit. He was a great guy.
I think
not the writer Kit Carson, not the Western scout, but the writer Kit Carson.
Oh, there you go. So. Well, Peter, it's 2026. And the pundits are saying, or some of the pundits are saying, that Hollywood is on life support, that the movie business is in the toilet, everything is crazy. We have you in the chair today, and I'm curious as to whether you could comment on the health of the movie business and the future of movies on the big screen, because there's a lot of attacks on the studios as to what they're making and whether it can compete with streaming. What are your thoughts there? What's going through your mind when you hear the latest things about film?
Yeah, well, it's certainly a question that we've all been puzzling about. And certainly the model of the so-called international independent model that I grew up on with Dino De Laurentiis and Salkind and Carol Cohen-Cannon, that really is now sort of disappeared in the way it was in those days. And the streamers have had an enormous impact on it. What's interesting is it feels a lot like the business when I first came to it in the mid-'70s, when you had the first wide releases and the old roadshow stuff of the '60s was turning into now a different kind of film. But in those days, the studios, they didn't release that many movies. And of course, they didn't cost much. Today, what we're seeing is a dramatic number. We're reducing the number of studios and we're reducing the number of pictures even more dramatically. But those pictures that are being made are now more and more giganto budgets. I mean, when we made Terminator 2 at $110 million in 1991, they all thought we were nuts and that was, the most expensive picture ever made. What was the matter with us? And now, of course, that's a low budget picture for the studios. There's 400 million plus is on these pictures. And so that's a different world. And there's always going to be a theatrical business for what I call the giganto movie. All right. And there's not going to be that many of them because of the nature of what subjects work for that. And also because of the costs. And there's only a few companies that can afford to take those risks. And the independents, where we used to be able to take risks for mainline studio movies, you really can't do that anymore. No independents are going to be making $200 million movies. So that's given us a real shock and also a real challenge. And that challenge is there a theatrical market for a movie made, call it under $25 million with some decent cast, that is a good theatrical movie, the kind of movies we made at Carolco and that Cannon made and that Dino made and we made over, that 30-year period where the independents had such a run. And the question is, of course, the jury is out. I am still among those who believe that the theatrical experience is still far superior to watching it on your computer and watching it on your television, even with a nice sized television. I just don't think it's the same. At Carolco, the only Academy Awards we won were in sound. And there's one thing about the movie is, and particularly now with the Dolby Atmos, which is now the latest, I mean, the sound in a movie theater is just not something you can touch elsewhere. And now with some of the laser color timing and all the rest of it, it is not like what we used to do and say, oh, gee, you're missing two focal lengths of light and it's never the same as in a movie. Here, you're actually going to be seeing things on a screen that you literally cannot see on your television. So I'm hopeful that that aspect of it drives people back, and young people will go because that's where they go on dates, and they're in the mall and they do things that are not just where they want to be in the house. But all of those are hopes more than they are something that I can make any kind of a prediction about what's going to happen.
Peter, if I may, I got into the owning and operating movie theaters in the mid 1970s when you came in. So, in that, you guys, if there's ever an Oscar for blockbusters, you guys should get 12 Oscars. What you guys did was amazing in terms of the not necessarily the quality of the films, but you guys are making money movies. You're making box office movies. In that way, on behalf of my partner and I, we thank you because you knocked them dead for such a long time. I think that you can make $25 million minus movies as long as they're aimed at the teenage market, or maybe the up to 25 market where they go dating on Friday night and what have you. I think the problem is a movie like Tootsie, a movie like Kramer versus Kramer. Whether you can make those or not for under 25, I don't think you can. That's the audience that really is in trouble since COVID. And we all know why, because as you say, there's a great picture at home on television. You don't have to put up with people with parking, with going into the theater, as great as it is, and having people turn on their cell phones. There's some minuses to going to the theater, though I do agree that the theatrical experience is the greatest thing in the world when everything is right. But you're right. It's for event movies in the future. I don't see it being for the little kind of film that would break through from time to time.
Well, let me just say this here. I'm going to add one factor to it that I like to think of as important, and maybe I'm fooling myself on it, having spent so much time doing it. I read somewhere that one of the top people at Netflix said that their great competition was whether or not somebody would go to sleep. All right, so that they're just trying to make sure that they'd rather keep the TV on rather than turning it off and going to sleep. That's not what a theatrical film producer is doing. They're thinking about what it takes to get a person out of their home, hopefully with their date, and go to the movies because it's that interesting enough. And as equally important is that the movie delivers, that you get the word of mouth. Because it's still the most important way in which a theatrical picture works is if other people talk about it and they want it to happen. And you find that when you have that kind of thing happening, you somehow can't get out of the way of the movie, even when you don't even think it was going to do as much, perhaps, as you hoped.
And you can't buy it.
And you can, there's a discipline missing at the streamers. A discipline about how you make a theatrical motion picture to get people out of their house. And that's why I've been a big critic of Netflix, not only because we were criticized at Carolco for breaking the price structure with actors and directors, and we did, no doubt about it. Although we justified it because we didn't give the same kind of back ends the studio did. But what we're doing is nothing compared to what Netflix is doing. Netflix is doing buyouts that are staggering, and $30-40 million buyouts for an actor for a movie that is essentially a television movie. So you get these $110-120 million television movies where everybody's getting paid a lot of money. The agents are making these buyout deals, and they're making movies that would fail in the box office. And I think that's the great challenge if we can do that.
If I may, sorry, Peter.
Sorry, no, go ahead. Yeah.
If I may jump in, let's talk about the fact that you have a new book called Karmic Winds coming out soon. And you really take us back to Yale, to where you're trained as an attorney. And I couldn't believe a couple of your classmates were Clarence Thomas and you had John Bolton. This is an amazing group of guys. Was anything of these fellows, anything that you could see would become as prominent as they became?
Well, Clarence was one of my best friends at Yale. I mean, he and I hung out together. We were both married, so we both lived up in the married student housing. And one of my favorite stories, which they cut out of the memoir, is that, every year there would be a touch football game between the Yale Law Journal and the Harvard Law Review at the same time as the Harvard-Yale undergrad football game. And so our third year, the Yale Law Journal had to put together a team to compete against the Harvard Law Review. And I convinced Randall Casey Cow, who had beat me out for editor-in-chief, to make Clarence an honorary note and comment editor for a day, all right, as our ringer, all right, and he beat the shit out of them, I want to tell you, and threw a football the length of the field, and we beat those guys, and it was thanks to Clarence. And I like to think of those kinds of stories about Clarence and talking about basketball and all that, because the guy I knew there is not the guy that's on the Supreme Court. He whatever happened to him after he left, whatever resentments or things that went on there, he ended up taking on a very hard right view of the world that I didn't see when I was there. I still remember with him and he always wore bib overalls, like a real country boy,
Well,
and Bill Coleman, the Coleman family were a very prominent African American family. You may have heard of Bill Coleman. Was right up there with Thurgood Marshall among the black lawyers who really made a difference in the civil rights movement. And both his son Bill Coleman Jr. and Levita Coleman, his daughter, were in our class. Levita 1 year behind us, and Bill in our class. And it was interesting because Levita was one of the reasons that the senator from Virginia agreed to vote for Clarence and finally got him over the hurdle to get confirmed. But
if I may, Peter, thing with Clarence Thomas is it's not so much that it seems he took a far right turn. He went somewhere way beyond that. He's in a place where I don't know that we've seen anyone on the Supreme Court be where he is or has been.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. It's appalling. I still had some basic touch to a mutual friend of ours, Frank Washington, who I've kept in touch with, but no. I mean that Clarence that writes these opinions and does some of these things. It's just not the guy I knew. I have fond memories of the guy I knew and hung out with and played basketball with in law school, and that's it.
But at least he married a nice woman as his wife.
Well, at that time, he was married to a very nice black lady who was a wonderful person, and then that was part of getting in with these right wingers. That
and we know her name wasn't Anita Hill,
right?
So I have a question. I ask on my own podcast. I ask this question of a lot of my guests. When you were little, Peter, and your family wanted to do things, were you a movie-going family? Were movies important to your life as a little person?
No. In fact, the story I like to tell is that we rarely went to movies, and when we did, it was usually because I lived in a place called Fairfield, Ohio, which is about 20 miles north of Cincinnati. And this in the 60s, that's when they had the Bard cinemas, and so you would do the road show and you would have the Bard cinema, and then you would have the second run and the third run house. So most of what we were getting were third run house product, right? And the thing I can remember about it was in those days, if you wanted to take your lady to the movie, you said, "Oh, honey, we'd like to go to this." And they say, "Fine." Today, you say, "Oh, let's go to this movie." They say, "I'm not going to that movie." It's very different in the way the women view the decision to go to the movies on date night or otherwise. And no, I had music was everything to me when I was a kid. Growing up, that was when the 60s were happening. We were all into bands. I played in a band and went to college. It was all about music. And I viewed movies as really units of product, frankly. Music was where it happened. That's the great American art form.
Did you have a favorite?
Part of my education was to realize that wasn't true and that movies were really quite incredible as an art form.
Did you have a favorite band in those days?
Oh, yeah, sure. It was actually the Yardbirds, who would later became the Led Zeppelin, right? The famous story, when they wanted to call themselves the new Yardbirds, and Paul Samuel Smith said, "Hey, we're not going to allow that," right? So they said, "Okay, well," the manager said, "Well, this is going to go over like a lead balloon." So they said, "Okay, let's call it Led Zeppelin." Well, I was a huge fan of the Zepp, and of course, a huge fan of the Allman Brothers. We had the Allman Brothers come to our college. I was president of student body. We made sure they came. Jimi Hendrix. I was a huge Jimi Hendrix fan. When I started my practice and I met Albert Grossman, who was sort of a legend in the business, and he sort of became my mentor, then of course I really connected with a lot of the people of that era, and it still is the thing that we grew up on. Music was what was happening.
Yeah, and Grossman had Bob Dylan and Janis Joplin. I mean, he really was in his time quite the guy. No question.
Yeah, he did, and he handled them all. I mean, that's why the movie that was done was quite good, but Jay Cox knows goddamn well that not the way Albert looked. All right, he knew Albert. All right, and that way they portrayed Albert in that movie was really awful. Although the movie was quite good, I thought, but nevertheless, yeah. But it was, he was a brilliant mind. A brilliant mind in business, and he was very, very important to me. And I met my wife through him, and so. That was a big part of my life was Albert.
Well, and
almost everyone that you mention in the book, I knew.
Yeah.
And so, and I have to say, a lot of their pictures could be in the post office, as you know. But we'll start out with Alexander Salkin. I knew Alexander Salkin.
You knew Alex. You knew Alex.
I knew Alex very well. Yeah, and his son Ilya. And Pierre Spangler, the whole group of them. And what I was shocked at was my naivete. I'm in the can with Alex having dinner. He's pitching me the Mario Puzo script of Superman. I want to do it. I'm at Paramount. I want Paramount to do it. I'm very excited about it. And he takes out a passport and puts it on the table. What the hell is this? He says, look at the passport. So I pick it up. I look at it from Costa Rica. What does that mean? I have no idea. Eventually, I find out that Costa Rica has no extradition. You can run to Costa Rica if you're a crook and not be extradited. And that was my beginning.
Well, that was, but that was not the reason why Alex was. Alex got out of Europe to Mexico in the Second World War, and the Nazis were going to get him. Right? And once he was in Mexico, that's where he met his insane wife. Now he wanted to make sure he wasn't taxed anywhere, so he had the main film company was Film Export out of it was actually based in Zug, like a lot of them were in those days, and that was where a lot of the problems had. And his main company, the one that made the deals on Superman, was a Panamanian company. And but then I moved him all into the islands, to the Dutch Antilles. But you know what he named his production company? I don't know if you'll get this. Kentharis.
Oh, I didn't know. No.
The smoke and the dope. I mean, in those days, you wouldn't have thought it, but Alex liked his marijuana. So
yeah. Well, also, we should mention Alex, and you worked with him and understood him and really helped him a lot. We should also talk about the famous Musketeers and that movie. Tell us all about that and how he got into trouble with some actors.
Well, yeah, that was actually before I started representing Alex. Yeah, he came up with the idea of hiring everybody to do one movie and shoot two. All right. Actually, when he did this on Superman, he also had the same idea. But it went over budget. And then when Donner said, I'm not going to continue unless you do X, Y, and Z, and he had to replace him, that's where that happened. But yes, that created all kinds of trouble. And that's what after that, everyone had the clause in the contract, you can only use the performance in one movie. But yeah, that was Alex. And that was one of the first pictures he had that was out of the English stuff that he did at Pinewood that actually did some business.
Oh, it was a pretty big
that allowed him to get the deal. But it was really, I don't know if you know the story, but he had gotten a loan from Bill Foreman. Arthur, if you knew the Foreman family, but Bill Foreman had the Olympic Kinesitrope in Germany, and Alex had the number 2 guy there basically forge a bunch of notes for Bill Foreman, which he used and discounted in order to get the money to put the down payment on the rights and to get Puzo and to lock up Brando, which was one of the big problems I had to deal with for Alex. And it was great for me, a young lawyer. I mean, I'm a kid, and suddenly as the Warner executive said, Alex has more problems than God, right? Yeah. And that was great for a young rookie lawyer like me because I was, immodestly able to solve almost all of them. And Alex came out of it smelling like a rose. I have many, many fond memories of hanging out with him in Paris and in Zurich, and never in London where he might be taxed.
Peter, I'm wondering, knowing what I do about the major leagues of the film business, you being a lawyer and being in the real big leagues of the movie business, you must have seen everything. I would guess you've seen it all.
I've seen a lot. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think about just everything that can go screwy, and some real slick stuff I've seen. And
You've seen it.
yeah. And
By the way, in the 60s music, did you get to know Saul Zaentz?
well, that's an interesting name you mentioned, because
Loved him. I loved him.
okay, well, I'm going to tell you, I think Saul Zaentz was a real crook, and I'll never forgive him for what he did to the Creedence guys.
But I still loved him.
My first big cases was that, all right? And you know the story. So after the big success, John personally told me the story. He came in to Saul and said, Saul, look, I'm having all this success. He's got one of those 5 on 90 deals, and I think I'm entitled to a raise. And you know what Saul told him? I'm going to do something better than a raise for you, John. I'm going to put you in this same tax deal I have for myself, and all your money is going to go in these trusts in the Bahamas, and you're not going to pay any taxes to anybody. I'm going to increase you by 50% because you're not going to pay any taxes. And John, and he never forgave himself for this, went along with that. And then one day,
IRS.
Bank and Trust, you know the story, Arthur, poof, all the money the boys had earned, all of it gone, except Saul's money. Saul's money wasn't gone. Saul got his money.
And then Fogerty did not perform, for 10 years?
Well, no, it was a shorter period than that. But we actually got involved because Joe Smith, who ran, Electra Asylum in those days, had signed John after the end of the Saul Zaentz deal, and he had done a sort of a not a very good album called Blue Ridge Rangers or something like that. But he wouldn't record; he was just up in the woods hunting. And Joe called Werner Wolfen, who was the senior partner at the firm, and said, "Can you guys take this case and try to get his money back for him? Because this is a great artist, and I can't get him to perform." So we did. We took the case, and I was the expert witness in the trial, basically ripping this tax scheme to shreds. And let me tell you something, Arthur. The scheme that Saul used for himself and for John was complete bullshit. All right, and we wanted all the money back, all of it back from the lawyers and accountants who let John get into the deal, but Saul got off. All right. And then you know the rest of the story, Arthur, because then John did put out a record that was quite successful called Center Field. Put me in, coach. I'm ready to play today, right?
I'm ready to play today.
Hey, all right. And there was another song on that album called Zaentz Can't Dance, but He'll Steal Your Money. Zaentz Can't Dance, but He'll Steal Your Mind.
That's great.
All right, so I remember because one of my classmates at Yale was the president of Warner Records at that time. He calls me on the phone. What are we going to do about this, Peter? I said, why don't you change Zaentz to Vance? And you don't know anything about it. What's to you, So they put it out that way. And Saul sued. He sued not only for defamation, but sued for copyright infringement, claiming that John had infringed John's own writings that Saul owned under the publishing company. How about that for being a great guy? All right.
He's a brilliant guy, though.
And we try that case up there, and we win that case. The jury's out for about 15 minutes. Because they come back and say a man can't infringe his own songs. That went to the Supreme Court because the court wouldn't award John his attorney's fees, and he fired us because of it. But nevertheless, that is why Saul Zaentz, as great as the movies he made, and I remember when Michael Douglas and I were talking about a lot of the stuff that Saul did, and I was never involved in that, don't know anything about it. Maybe he's the greatest guy in the world, but I'm telling you what he did to John Fogerty, Arthur.
Not nice. Well, I didn't know that. I just want to say that, but what he did do with the future films that he made, his passion was unparalleled, and it was contagious. And I, as I say, not being involved with what you're talking about, I love this guy because they don't come along too often in terms of movie making.
And you may be 100% right. I never met the man at all. All right. I only dealt with because we tried to sue him for getting the money back, but that was thrown out. So we had to sue only the lawyers and the accountants. So I never dealt with him. And then when they ultimately tried the case up north, I actually wasn't there. My partner went up there and tried the case to win it. But we were just always on John's side. And one of the great moments in my career was when after the trial, after I testified and I got off the stand and John came up to me and said, man, thank you. I never really understood what they did to me until now. Thank you.
That's
You know,
great.
and that was,
So
every once in a while, you as a lawyer, you get to have some kind
Put
of,
me in, coach.
put me in.
Speaking of money, Carolco is a major player in Hollywood. You're not distributing your films yourself.
Carolco's dead. Carolco's dead, Steve. Carolco died a terrible death after I left the company in 1992.
No, I'm talking about previous. I'm not talking about now.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that, did Carolco ever have any trouble collecting its money? Because one of the key questions these days in our business today is, will you get anything beyond your fees as a producer? Will you actually make money from the distribution? In those days, when such huge successes as Terminator 2, did they always get their money?
Oh, yeah. We got paid, and we paid everybody that what they were entitled to. We had exactly 0 participant lawsuits, and we had some pretty hefty guys there, who wanted to get paid. But a lot of it was the way we did the deals. They got paid a lot of money up front, which obviously they got, and they only got the rest of the money, when it's way out there. Which by then, it was everybody was paying. No, we didn't have any problem collecting money at all in the business. A lot of the problems in it is, making sure you get your fair share of the money, right? When you have, when Kenny Ziffern, who you guys may know, is really one of the great old lawyers of the business, and Kenny once said to me, he said, "Look, Peter, there's 3 ways they're going to get you. They're going to get you on the allocations, they're going to get you on the settlements, and they're going to get you on the off the tops. And you got to make sure you know what you're doing on those." And so, that's naturally when I'm on the Carolco side, we had our stuff right, but dealing with the theaters and the distributors from our standpoint, that was a problem. We got allocated. We got allocated plenty of times, and we got settled out. I'll never forget on Terminator 2, talking to the guys at TriStar and David Madeline. He was a buddy. I said, "David, you're settling us. We have 470s and down, and you're settling us across the run at, like 55, 50, 51%, 49, something like that." And I said, "You're settling that damn Steven Spielberg picture you did, Hook, all right? And you're settling that at 56%.
Julian, we know what he's talking about.
Oh yeah, you can't settle a Steven Spielberg picture. That's one of his clauses.
Okay, so I'll come out here as the naive civilian here. What the F are you guys talking about? What does settling mean?
Settling is when when you think that you actually have a deal where you're giving a picture to a theater like what Arthur owns. You actually have a deal. All right. When I first started in the business, you would actually even have a contract. No more. You don't even have a piece of paper. All right. You have an oral conversation about what the deals are, and then you settle it out once the run's over. So you would have like a top end picture would have like 90-10 after the house nuts and say 470s and down. 470s is a guarantee. That is, we got at least 70% of the gross box office or 90% after the house nut, whichever was better. But no matter what was in those initial terms, it always got settled at the end of the run. So the settlements is where obviously the studios have an incentive to settle out the pictures that didn't work as well against the ones that work well, where they're going to have.
But Peter, before they settled with you, they settled with guys like Julian and me.
Right.
They were first, or Sumner Redstone they had to settle with, who owned
no doubt. No doubt.
Well, Sumner's my mentor. I mean,
no doubt.
So
no doubt. And you guys had your deals, and it was across a group. You do settle on a group of pictures.
Now, you understand that today it's all aggregate. You book a movie and it's going to be 52% aggregate every day of the engagement. So there's no settlement afterwards. 60, really? 50, all 60. Disney can get.
Then I don't know. That's not the business I was in.
That's what it is now.
Now, Arthur, again, you're talking shop talk here. Aggregate means
it's all throughout the run. No matter what week of the run it is, you're going to get a certain floor of a percentage of the gross revenue.
There's no settlement to it.
The way we used to do it, where you would get a higher percentage, higher guarantee in the early weeks of the run, where there was presumably much more business, than in the lower weeks of the run, where you would be presumably having not full houses, and your house nut was therefore higher as a percentage.
But more frequently, the higher, the top end was still settled at the end of the game.
Okay, there you go.
Theater to distributor. So the aggregate. There's no settlement. There's nothing. This is the story. Day one to the end of the thing. First day, last day, it's always going to be X.
Julian, what were you about to say?
God knows, it was so long ago. Also, what I wanted to say, and this was what we had as a credo, Peter, you may remember, that the contract was the beginning of negotiations.
Yep.
That's what it was.
Mario Casar once said to me years ago, he said, you start negotiating a contract with an Arab right after you sign it.
Yeah.
That was what it was like dealing with the theater owners, according to the guys who did it. But in any it was a great thing, and we got to have the theaters healthy. They got to make money, and if they don't, we're going to be in trouble worse. All right, because we have a very common goal together to make money, and so all these kinds of things are just normal business, and I don't take anything from it.
One of the most amazing things about your book, Peter, for me, was to start out on Terminal Island. That's right. One hell of a way to begin. We should point out that Terminal Island's a bit of a prison, and we find Peter, a man who ran many companies or got involved, is sitting in prison. And I think we ought to talk a little bit about the importance of Bardo, meditation, and how the hell you ended up there.
Well, telling the story is sometimes hard, and that's why I tried to lay it out more in the book. But when you're convicted of something you didn't do, when people are out to get you, all right, it happens in this country. And when you're the victim of it, even though for me it's a relatively minor thing, I was in for 8 months. I talk in the book about an African-American guy who was in for 35 years so they made up a case against him. So, the first and foremost thing about, once it's over and they nailed you, however they did it, you got to then come to grips with it. You have to, how do I live? How do I just not spend all my time being angry and thinking about vengefulness and the rest of it? And, both when we had done Jacob's Ladder and I had first gotten to really understand the idea of the Bardo in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, and my wife and I are meditators, and so we also had read about it. And then she gave me one of the Dalai Lama's books on it, and that was a way of thinking about what happened to me and kind of using the idea of the Bardo of having the moment of luminosity, and then you go back through all your whole life, except you see things very clearly for the first time, all the way back to the beginning where you have that choice. Like in the movie, you have a choice. Do you go into the light or do you go back to the connections that you wanted to resolve? And so, it allowed me to think about it, allowed me to write, it allowed me to feel good about it, to accept this happened to me. In the scheme of things, it wasn't as bad as it could have been. I had great support from a lot of people. Injustices happened. And, I just happened to be the source of one of them, and getting that attitude and learning from it by re-experiencing it and the choices I made and the things I did, that was a very, fulfilling experience for me. And writing the book was kind of the outpicturing of that.
Well, it's interesting too, because it seems that almost everybody in prison often feels they were don't belong there.
That's not true. That's not true. I can tell you from the guys that were in Terminal Island, there were very, very few of them who didn't think they belonged there. All right.
Well,
or even would try to.
You would know much more about that than I do.
I would hope so.
Yeah, but
what I'm trying to say to you is that in prison, it's not considered a good form to be talking about your case. And it's definitely not good form to talk about how innocent you are, as I learned very quickly, all right? They don't want to hear it, all right? You're there, and, people bitching around like that are not the way you want to deal with it. You want to deal with the situation you're in and handle it and do your time, with some dignity. And that was another important part of what I had to go through. Doesn't matter how stupid it was. In this case, it's so stupid it's beyond words, and yet there it is. It happened.
What an adventure, Peter. My God, what an adventure. I want to go back for a second to this term you mentioned called a settlement. Sometimes it was used, the word was adjustment. Just the film rental. And so are you aware that when Lou Wasserman took over Universal and it was explained to him how the deal went with the theater in terms of the adjustments, the head of sales at the time was a guy named Hy Martin. And he told Hi Martin, I never want that word used again. And he had his assistant bring in every dictionary at Universal and had them rip out the page with the word adjustment on it. And from that day forward, until they went firm terms. So if you bought in at 70, 60, 50, 40, that's what you were going to pay. I have a question for you. What was the turning point with Carol Co. in terms of bankruptcy? When did it all go downhill?
Well, it didn't really ever go bankrupt. It didn't go bankrupt. What happened was, so I left the company in the spring of '92, just as we were delivering Cliffhanger, all right? And we had just come off of something that no independent company has ever done. We had the #1 worldwide grossers back to back, Terminator 2 and Basic Instinct. And we had had some very challenging pictures that people talked about, like Jacob's Ladder, The Doors, L.A. Story, and Cliffhanger turned out to be a big hit too. And we had had Total Recall with Arnold, and so we were really sitting high. But that was the fall of 1991, when we had all this money out on all these pictures. The American Bank called our line, and they called it on covenant violations because we had to take a big write-off on the investment we had made in a rack jobber called Lieberman. And we had bought that because of, the guy I had hired to run that division, Jose Menendez. And Jose had talked us into buying that, and it really went south. And after he was murdered, I had to deal with it, and I realized at some point quickly this wasn't working. I sold it. We took a big write-off that was all a goodwill write-off. It wasn't like this was a cash loss, but that was enough for the bank to call the line. And we had a $70 million drawn on a $100 million line, and he said, no more. I said, you got one picture in this line that's going to pay off the whole loan, I told the guy. And he said, nah, we're not interested in that. That picture was Basic Instinct.
Great story.
At the same time, and this is what really killed us, and why I had to leave the company and why I was sort of the guy blamed for all this, was that the main way in which we got money, the same way we had gotten money when I started with Alex Salkind, through what was then the Slavenberg Bank and then Credit Lyonnais Bank Nederland, that had gone into the scandal with Peretti. And so suddenly, instead of us, Tom Pollock, when he ran Universal, he knew us very well and good friend of mine. And Tommy said, hey, I know what happened to you, Peter. If it hadn't been for Peretti, you would have just gone to Rotterdam and got your money. And I said, you bet. It's exactly what would have happened. And so it was the combination of Jose's murder, then the downturn in the world, Lieberman getting really beat up when Disney went direct on all of their videos, and the Peretti scandal. And suddenly I'm the genius of money, and where's the money, right? And so I had brought in three partners. Carol, we had Pioneer Electronics, Canal Plus, and Rizzoli della Coracera, and they came in with money, but they wanted to do it their way. And at the time, we had a conflict between Kassar and I about what was the best way to go. And the problem is, this is one of the problems in the film business. You guys probably know it. You think you have a hit, you think you know something, but you don't know anything. You don't know any more than when you owed before you had the hit. And I really think that having the hit with the back-to-back hits with Mario, it just went to his head. And I said we got to make more what I call mid-range pictures. We can make a Terminator when we can, but that's a rare thing, right? And what we need to do is live on Universal Soldier was a picture we had done that was very profitable for us, all right? Like on Terminator, we had $110 million investment. Our ultimate at that time was $160. Okay, that's a profit, but geez, for $110 million investment. So you see what I'm saying? And whereas on Universal Soldier, we in for like $22 million, and we were going to do 50 on it. So that was what I was trying to say. We need to be involved in a smaller group of pictures, and then every once in a while you have a event picture, tentpole, whatever the word you use, and that then drives the rest of it.
Understand, but considering
and that's what happened. They just started making tent poles, and then it just blew up within a year.
I understand that now. Now I do. It's a great explanation. But their batting average, irrespective of the amounts of money that it cost to make the movies or the movies took in, their batting average was ridiculous compared to really any batting average in the business throughout the years. These guys were unbelievable. What was the magic?
Well, I mean, I think the magic was that Mario really believed in directors, and I think he was right. You really make a movie based on the director, and the director's the one who's going to get the cast. And he would take his risks by going with what a director wanted to do, and he would buy properties for them and go with them. That's why we did Jacob's Ladder. That wasn't the kind of movie Mario would really understand, but Radio Line wanted to do it. He wanted 100 days. He thought he could do the picture with modest cast for I think it was $26 million. So fine, no problem, right? And we did very well on that. Except once we then didn't, the next big picture he did after Cliffhanger, which went way over budget, but still at $60 million, that turned out to be a very profitable picture. That would be in my idea of a more mid-range picture. But the next one he did was Cutthroat Island. All right, you remember that picture?
Whoa.
All right,
I do.
yeah. Okay. So originally Michael Douglas, he wanted to basically do Pirates of the Caribbean. He had Michael Douglas. He has Rennie Harlan coming off of 2 hits with us, and it was just it was a big mistake. And there were a lot of reasons that went into the mistake, but the biggest mistake was you shouldn't spend $110 million to make that movie.
Right. Well, one of the things that was interesting with the timing of you guys is that the foreign markets exploded somewhere in the 80s, and you were there, and these pictures that you were making were huge foreign.
Yeah, I mean the foreign was big, but the thing that really broke the foreign was in the late 60s when they, after the war, they finally had the television starting to buy, and you had people like De Laurentiis who could get the local distributors to go get TV pre-sales, and so you would have the guarantees that you could get, and these were the only way they could get these American pictures. Otherwise, they'd pay through the nose by the studio. And so it was really the fact that you had television becoming unbound from the public ownership and control in Europe and in Japan that became the big deal. And then, of course, video came, and that was all available. And so, yes, it was a huge explosion in the amount of revenue from the foreign marketplaces. And, Dino was the father of all of us, but that's what we did. We were making international independent pictures. And
yes. At the same time, what foreign was for so many years was pre-World War II movie theaters that now became modern movie theaters. Certainly in the 80s, by then they were building way up, and the theatrical market became bigger than ever.
Oh, yeah, no doubt about it. I mean, that was one of the things that Canon did that I really enjoyed. We bought the 2 major chains in Holland. We had 2 chains in England. We bought the major chain in Italy. Obviously, they had their movies in their theaters in Israel. And so, yeah, I mean, I really learned the theater business, by running those theaters essentially with Yoram and Menachem. I mean, that dramatic changes in the theaters. Once you started plexing the theaters in Europe, then it was just a whole different ballgame.
What happened to Golan Globus? What made that go away?
The funny thing about that is that, Yoram would, even when I was fighting with Menachem and telling him he's crazy, Tom Pollock and I were on the board trying to stop him from just, if he made $2 or $3 million movies, it's fine. Once he started just spending all this money, and we went through this thing where Tom and I said, you got $70 million for the program this year. He had spent 70, plus this over the top, the movie he was going to do with Stallone. I said, you've spent 70 by June 30th, all right? And we're out of money. And and the banker, Franz Hoffman, and Tom Pollock and I were ganging up on him. And, but didn't matter. Yoram was 100% for Menachem until Peretti comes along. And then Peretti comes along, and Peretti, offers to buy the company. He bought it into MGM. And when that happened, to his credit, as crazy as Menachem was, he said, I'm not going to be part of this. I'm not going to be part of this guy. Because you talk about a guy who was a true criminal in every sense of the word, Giancarlo Peretti and Federico Fiorini and that crowd. I mean, that's as bad as it gets. That's one of the biggest scandals in the film business, and no one really ever talks about. But, I know this.
They don't want to talk about it.
I want to talk about it because you had this guy Fiorini buying MGM, a great project, and got all the money from Credit Lyonnais Bank Nederland. And that's because the president of the republic told Jack Lang, you tell the bank to give Fiorini and Peretti whatever they want. All right? Because it was all getting kicked back to the Socialist Party. It was corrupt beyond belief. And it really blew up in everyone's face once the investigation started. But by then, Menachem and Yoram had split. And so Menachem went off to do 21st Century, and he then just made a whole bunch of bad movies. I remember getting calls from him. He was in Russia. Now he was directing again. He would go to the end of his days making a movie. But he was just never a responsible executive. Yoram was the executive, and when they split, it was just a question of time. And
When there was a sub-distribution business, we represented Golden Globus in New England. So we were states writers, if you will, in the 70s and into the early 80s. And had
Peter, excuse me, Arthur. Peter, I'm a big fan of the first Rambo movie, First Blood. And it's a movie that's on my constant rotation. And I think it's a classic action movie. Certainly gets the respect. Was that a tough one to put together?
I just started representing the boys when they were making. My first deal with Vina and Kassar was to do the tax deal on First Blood. All right, so that was how they had already done the deal to get it together. I learned all about it later, but that was all more or less before my time. But it was Kassar's genius to think, Warner's and all that, you may know, they had controlled the property forever. The writer was a well-known writer of this kind of novel, and Warner wanted to do it with Dustin Hoffman. And it was Stallone, the idea of casting Stallone as Rambo that was the brilliance of it. They made the picture for, I think it was like $14 million in Canada. Mario got all the money from his father had a friend in Lebanon, and the Lebanon bank just gave him the money for it. And he went and made the movie, and of course it became a sensation. And then Rambo 2, but you got to remember, that picture only did about $35 million of box office in the U.S. when it opened, all right? People think it's such a huge hit. It wasn't.
I do remember. I remember.
But it did well in foreign, didn't it?
Oh, yeah, it was huge. But it was more than it created the expectation of the sequel, what he's coming back.
That's where the big one was.
That's where the genius came in. Now, I was just basically their day-to-day lawyer on it, but I can tell you the story of what happened. They were working with this young writer who had made a picture, and they knew about him because of the Terminator, and they sat him with Stallone, and they came up with the idea. That young writer was James Cameron. All right.
Wow.
And he was the one who came up with the idea where you have that opening on Rambo 2, where you see Richard Crenna walking up to the wire fence, and then you see Stallone, and he comes up, a perfect metonymic shot, right? And you can see them together, and the Crenna says, "We want you out of here. We got to send you back to Vietnam." And Stallone says, "Do we get to win this time?"
Great.
They went crazy. I mean, in Lebanon, where Mario's from, they would actually have the guerrillas come in there and shoot their guns in the air when they watched it. It was a phenomenon. And it was because of that success that they then gave me the big offer to come join them to be CEO of the company. But it was, both of them are just fabulous action pictures, and not particularly great directors as such. Those directors didn't have any great careers, but they were just really, really good ideas for movies. Contained actions, character driven. That's the key. Today,
Peter, when you were on top of the world, when Carolco was on top of the world, and they literally were in the motion picture business, what was that like for you? What was life like for you?
Well, it was stressful. I mean, because there was always problems. I mean, you look back on it, like I say in the Bardo, it's different than when you're going through it, right? And it was not like we were sitting around thinking, "Oh, fantastic." I'm sitting around thinking, "Jesus, we got a problem because we were trying to do this Mel Gibson, Julia Roberts picture, and Barry Hirsch is screwing around with me, and Warner's is mad at us because we broke the price on Mel Gibson for Air America, and the banks are giving me trouble, and Jose gets murdered, and what are we doing about that?" I mean, my day was a day of stress. So it wasn't like I'm sitting around thinking, "Wow, I'm on top of the world." It wasn't
no joy. I mean,
no,
God almighty. Yeah.
Getting back to First Blood for a second, when I opened Variety one day, there was a big color double truck ad for First Blood, Sylvester Stallone, Kirk Douglas. And I was curious because Kirk apparently was replaced by Richard Crenna to play his boss, Rambo's boss.
No, that was
Do you remember
before
that?
my time. I remember vaguely,
Before your time.
Mario telling me the story about it, but I just don't remember enough to say what happened.
And the other thing I wanted to say is I was a trades reader. I probably read the trades every day for 30 years. When Golden Globus were announcing their new film slate, they would literally put 25 pages of ads in Variety and the Hollywood Reporter. And they were the worst ads I've ever seen for movies. They looked like they were put together by a third grade class, with photos that were out of focus, copy.
But you
How could
missed
they
the
do
point,
something like
Steve.
that? They were
The
not.
point is that they put them in and they were there.
It was driven a lot by the video buyers, which were all they cared about was bulk and what names they had in it, what they thought they could do as sort of minimal levels of revenue. This Mario and Andy hated these big things where you have all these pictures in there. They would do one very simple thing, which was one ad, one page, and you have to figure out the rest. You got to come to the office to find out what else is there. You know what I mean? So yeah, that was and we saw that with a lot of the guys who did the low end product, and it was not good. And it was all done in house, as you can imagine, and it was not good.
Yeah, in a house, a very shaky house. Now, in '88, I was hired by Tony Scotti to be national publicity director at Scotti
Tony
Brothers.
was on our board. I knew Tony
So
well in
they-
those days.
Yes, and they had the output deal with Jose Menendez's company, which was part of your company.
Jose Menendez worked for us. That was a Carol company.
Right, exactly. Can you tell us a little bit about Jose as a person? Because he's portrayed in some of these television movies as a total ogre. Do you think any of that is
I think
credible?
that what Lyle has said about him about the sexual abuse is complete bullshit, and I think it's offensive. And I couldn't agree more with the new newest attorney who says he's got to stop that if he ever wants to get out of prison. That's nonsense. As I say in the book, the reason why they had to kill Kitty too was because they had broken into Jose's computer and they could see that Jose had a $20 million death benefit in his contract, a contract I drafted. All right, except there was one small problem. The boys don't really know how to read a contract. And that contract said that he only gets the $20 million after he finishes his exams and that he's sufficiently acceptable for a $20 million risk, which he had never done. Funny. So literally, it was 2 days after the murder when, the CFO out there, Roger Smith, called and he said, Lyle's on to me, wants to know what's going on with the insurance policy. So that's all I need to know about them. All right. And then Lyle, I think Eric was more of the, but they were bad kids. They were just bad kids. Maybe you blame Jose for it. Look, Jose was a tough guy. He was a tough executive. I had my issues with him, but he was a straight shooter. He was a believer, worked his ass off. And the idea that he would do anything criminal is just inconceivable to me. All right. And all I can tell you is that, one of the stories I have is that I got a call from Jose and he said, look, Peter, I need to borrow $2 million from the deferred comp plan. Do you think that you can get Mario to agree to that? And I said, well, what do you need it for? And he said, well, we've decided we're going to leave our house out in Calabasas. We want to move into Beverly Hills so we can be closer to you guys. I said, okay, fine. So we did it. And that's where they bought that house on Elm Drive. All right. Now, the reason wasn't because he wanted to move in closer to us. It was because Lyle and Eric had been caught stealing from their friends. The cops had got him, and he had to get the hell out of Dodge. That's why he had moved out of there. I found that out later. So those were some bad kids. And I think led by Lyle. Eric was more of a weak guy that Lyle, one of the crazy things I remember, we had the DGA. We had a big ceremony for Jose at the DGA. I gave a speech, Ronald Wallace gave a speech, and Lyle gave a speech. And afterwards, I went up to Lyle and the mother, Jose's mother, and said, how much we regret this. And she starts screaming at me like everyone there, oh, it's all you guys. You killed him. You're responsible for it. All these bad people you're involved with. That's why Jose was killed. All right. And Lyle puts his arm around, oh, grandma, it's fine,
I want to jump in on something.
Tell me
totally
about
different.
that kid. All right. He makes Saul Zaentz look like an angel. All right.
I want to take a U-turn on the Jose highway here and,
Okay.
and talk a little bit about my first meeting with Arnold Schwarzenegger. He had been a bodybuilder. He had made a movie. Well, he was in a movie called Pumping Iron, and It was about that. And we had dinner. And I was interested in trying to acquire the movie, which eventually was acquired by Don Rugoff and Cinema 5. But anyhow, he says to me, Peter, that he wants to be a movie star. And after that, he can't run for president, but he wants to either be a senator or a governor. I think this guy has a thick German accent and he wants to be a movie star. What is he sniffing? What is he talking about? But, you talk about the power of intention. This man knew what he wanted, went out and did it. Now, I'm wondering what your negotiations were with him. Was he a tough character? Did you enjoy?
Normally we negotiated the deals with his agent. He was at ICM in those days, and we really didn't get with him. I got with him a few times on a couple of things. One was when we were putting out Total Recall, and that at that point Katzenberg was trying to get Schwarzenegger to do movies over at the Disney Touchstone thing, and he had called him stirring shit, saying, "Look at these guys, they're ruining your movie. We've got 9,000 trailers out. TriStar has 2,000 trailers out. We're buying 2,000 gross rating points. They're only buying 800 gross rating points. They're fucking up your movie. That's why you should be with us." So I get the call from Mario saying, "You got to talk to Arnold about this." All right. I said, "Well, why don't you talk to him about it?" No, you talk to him about it. You know all about this. So I get on the phone, and Arnold has his assistant, and Arnold says things to the assistant things sense to me, So I'm arguing with him that it says, "Look, we've discussed it with TriStar. We think we've got plenty of cover on this picture, and it's fine in the ratings. It doesn't matter how many trailers on Dick Tracy, the picture's not going to perform. We're on Memorial Day, it's going to perform. Don't worry." And he said, "You got to do more." So we ended up increasing the buy by a couple of $1 million, which in my opinion, we might have well burned it on Sunset Boulevard. But that was him. He was very focused on marketing, very focused on how to do it. I remember one time I had to go on some CNN thing, and he said to me, "Look, you don't have to answer the question. Just say what you want to say, and here's what you should say." And everything he said made a lot of sense. It was an impressive guy, Arnold.
He was very impressive, and I knew Arnold through a friend of his called Ralph Moeller.
Sure.
And, Ralph.
Boy,
and we would meet a lot of times at the Cafe Roma in Beverly Hills.
Yep, he loved that place.
He loved it, and with the cigars, and the girls with the cigars and the big cigars. And one time Arnold said, "Everybody says they're screwing me in this thing. They give me so much fucking money up front. I don't give a shit what they do." I'll
tell you one story on Terminator. So we make the deal with Arnold. At 14 million, which was at that time the largest thing anybody had been paid. Okay. And then Mario buys the script for Basic Instinct, and he wants Michael Douglas to be in it. And we're in Cannes with Michael and his wife and Ibiza, and he says, "Michael, we want you in this. We're going to pay you $20 million. I go, "Fuck. No, we can't pay you $20 million, So and then I got Ronnie Meyer. I got to say, we can't pay more than $14 million. If Arnold finds out about this, we're going to have to pay whatever that is, right? And so I tell you what, we'll pay him $14 million. We'll pay $1 million to JoJo as a producer, the brother, and we'll call it quits. But you got to keep this entirely between us." So Ronnie says, "Sure, absolutely." And you can guess. It was 10 days later when we got the call from Arnold. "You paid him $15 million. So we said, "Okay, Arnold, what do you want? What do you want, Arnold?" And Arnold said, "I want a plane." And so we bought him a plane. That's how we solved the problem. We bought him the plane for his salary on.
There's no business like show business.
He was a tough guy, and he delivered for us. He was easy on set. Always worked with there was never a problem with him, and he was a great movie.
Peter, did you like to be on set? Was that a perk for you at all, or you did avoid it?
You're only on the film set when there's trouble, right? That's the real hard work for people in my part of the business is once you're in the editing room and then you're starting to put it together and you see what you got. All right, then you see how you work on it, and that's where you can get involved. And as I learned the business really on the creative side, that's where I started to really enjoy the part of the business, is to take the raw material you have there and make it into a great movie. It's amazing what can happen. I mean, on Cliffhanger, Sly and Rennie thought they had the best thing since sliced bread. We knew it was a problem, tested it, picture tested terribly. But, TriStar went in there and they worked on it. Same thing on Legends of the Fall. Legends of the Fall was unreleasable until they finished it. And then, look, A Cliffhanger's a great movie. You had to cut the girl out. The whole thing with the romance didn't work. You had all this stuff about him being in threat, him being not the guy who can kill the whole Afghan army, but a guy who's in trouble. And suddenly the picture worked. And, I remember getting the call on from one of the girls at TriStar. Said, you're going to not believe this. She said, "But we have higher want to see with women than men on this picture." I said, "Really?"
Yeah.
So that was where I love the part of the movie business, is in the post period more than in the scripts. It's in post.
Peter, are you still interested in?
Yeah, I am. I'm trying to come out of it. first, because of the way the whole structure works, we have to fund things differently. So I've been developing, funding sources, equity funding sources, tax preference equity funding sources, and other ways to get as much money as possible to buffer the risk, so that you can then get some interesting pictures made. And yeah, we have one picture that we sort of took over from the Russian company that released it in Russia, called Master and Margarita, and we're recutting it, and we really think that's a great picture. I'm trying to do a remake with Johnny Mnemonic, a picture I made after I left Carolco. So yeah, I still got that in me. We'll see if I can pull something off.
Sure.
Well, we hope you do. Wish you a lot of good luck with it. God knows we understand it, I think, and go get them. We're still trying to on several things, so I understand, and it's great. One fast question. There was a guy that Ralph Moeller and I made a deal with who was from Berlin, from Germany, about early 1990s. And we made the deal. That deal was done. And the next week he went to jail for tax evasion in Germany. Who was that guy? Do you remember him? Do you know what his name was? German?
Well, there were a lot of tax investigations on several of the Neumarket schemes and the tax schemes that were done in Germany in those days.
But this guy was making a lot of movies. I mean, he was making all kinds of movies, not hits, just movies.
I have
all right.
Few people I can see, but can't really remember their names. But none of them are ones that I thought actually went to jail for it. I know a lot of people who were investigated, but most of the people I dealt with were dealing with things that were perfectly valid, and they all survived just fine. Although basically, when this happens, you find all the tax deals go away. Nobody wants to do it once there's that kind of inquiry about it. So they destroyed all the German tax shelter business, which was a great business for us.
Peter, what was the biggest? Well, this guy went to jail, but what was the biggest picture Carolco ever had?
Well, Terminator 2 was the number one worldwide grosser, that year, and it was the largest independent picture grossing picture, beat out Superman 1. And you can say that Lord of the Rings was greater, but Lord of the Rings, in my opinion, is a Warner picture, right? I still think that as an independent, we still have the largest one. I think very highly of that picture. But that's not a picture where we did much more than come with the money, right? I mean, because at the end of the day, I like to say Mario and my contribution on that picture is looking at it when it's done and said, "Jim, great job," right?
Yeah, I understand.
Well, we've reached the end of our show today, and Peter, you've been wonderful, and your book Cosmic Winds is everybody who wants to learn how the business really works or doesn't work should read your book. We're going to turn this over to our maestro, Mr. Mike Faber, as we finish our show.
I enjoyed talking with you. They're great to have these old stories.
You too. It was great.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Peter. You were wonderful to talk here tonight. It was wonderful. It was fascinating. And looking forward to reading the book. You've reached the end of this episode of the Tales from Hollywoodland podcast. Always remember, we couldn't do this without you. We want to hear from you, so please write us anytime at talesfromhollywoodland@gmail.com. Remember, you can find us wherever fine podcasts are found, and now you can even find us at our YouTube channel. If you made it this far into the episode, why not like and subscribe and give us a thumbs up? Or if you want, hit the little bell, and that will let you know when a new episode goes live. Or if you're listening to us, please give us 5 stars and subscribe. If you're on social media, please follow us up on Instagram and Facebook. Before we get out of here, let's check with the guys and see what's happening on their podcasts. Julian, who are you talking to this week?
This week is the wild and wacky actress Brenda Vaccaro. It starts out telling us stories about Midnight Cowboy and all her stuff on movies and theater and television. She's really outspoken, a lot of fun, and lived with Michael Douglas for 7 years.
Wow. That's pretty amazing. Looking forward to that one. Steve, what's going on Saturday night at the movies?
I go into my archives and I find an interview with Cy Bartlett. Cy Bartlett, back in the 50s, was a big noise in writing and producing. He produced the original Cape Fear, but we talk about a movie he wrote based on a novel he also co-wrote called 12 O'Clock High. He was very involved in World War II on the staff of the U.S. Army Air Corps in Europe. He worked for Carl Spaatz, who was a major general. And it's a fascinating talk about how the movie business was working back in 1949.
Wow. That's pretty amazing. That is pretty cool. So definitely check those podcasts out, folks. On behalf of Steve, Arthur, and Julian, thanks again for listening. This is your producer and announcer, Mike Faber. We will see you here next time on Tales from Hollywoodland. Your Hollywood adventure starts right here. That's right, folks, right here.
Looking for smart, fun conversations about science fiction, fantasy, superheroes, anime, gaming, and all things geek culture? Join me, your host Nathan, on the 42 Cast, where every episode brings together a new panel of fans to dive deep into the stories, characters, and worlds we love. From classic franchises to hidden gems, the 42 Cast explores genre fiction with insight, humor, and plenty of passionate debate. Subscribe to the 42 Cast wherever you get your podcasts and join the conversation.
This has been a broadcast of the ESO Network. Be part of the crew and help support our shows by donating to our ESO Patreon or by shopping at the TeePublic store, which can all be found at www.esonetwork.com. The ESO Network, your station for all things geek.